record, and then this conversation will also be live on Facebook for people who want to view it. So once again, welcome to this conversation with Annecy Baez and JP Infante. Annecy Baez is the author of My Daughter's Eyes, and this is a Dominican Writers Authors event. Go on, JP.
Here we are. Hi, Nancy. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Angie, for letting me in. They weren't letting me in. First off, obviously, Nancy, thank you again for doing this. This is the second time we chat about My Daughter's Eyes. A great collection. And I just, instead of reading your bio, I just wanted to read, Emily, please. I'm sorry, my daughter's here.
Don't worry.
I'm going to read the blurb in the back with the judge for the Marmot Prize, which the collection won. What he had to say about this collection, which I think it really captures it. And because there's so many layers, there's a lot of things that it touches on. A lot of, like, I was counting, and there's like about 13, like more than one, two, about 14 characters, which maybe 13, 14 characters that are central in their own way. So depending on the story, depending what role they play, they're central, right? So you have 14 characters from the 70s all the way to the year 2000. There's a lot that goes on in this collection. But I really love how Benjamin A. Symes, the judge of the 2007 Marmot Prize, how he described this collection. And he says of My Daughter's Eyes, he says, in the tradition of Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street and Juno Diaz Drown, Annecy Baez is a stylist who peoples her stories with urban characters who hold the language and memory of another country in their hearts and tongues, even as they yearn to be an integral part of the culture they so clearly stand apart from. There is passion, tenderness, and heartbreak throughout these pages, never any hint of overwriting or melodrama. If anything, Baez understates the difficult lives of her characters. She brilliantly captures the nuances of the internal lives of her characters as they struggle to express the emotions that sometimes threaten to break them. Her language is spare and her stories often seem more like vignettes, and yet there's a depth here that is undeniably moving, a beautiful and tender book. I just wanted to set it up with that.
You know, there's a story to that. You know, what's interesting for me is that Benjamin is one of my favorite Mexican writers, and I read a lot of his work. So, and he, you know how you read somebody and you're like learning how to write from reading how they wrote the story, their story. So I had read a lot of Benjamin Symes before I wrote my stories. And what's interesting is that I had submitted my, I wanted to be published by Curbstone Press because I knew, like I've said before, that as I was a professional working as a social worker and a therapist, so I was different from other people that are focusing on primarily being a writer. And so I knew at one point that I had to kind of be my own agent and find my own publishing company. And I bought this book called Yo Soy la Avon Lady. And in the back of that book, the company Curbstone Press had a mission statement that was so unbelievable to me. I had never seen that before. And it was a social justice perspective. And I said, I want to be published by that company. So I wrote to them and they asked me for the manuscript. And then the editor, Sandy Taylor, said, oh, you should apply for the Marmot Prize. But the first year I didn't make it. And then the second year I didn't make it. And then they said, you know, I made finalists, but not, you know, I didn't win the prize, because with the prize you could get published, you know? So what ended up happening, I read an article on Poets and Writers about how to make a collection of stories into interrelated stories. So I threw all my stories on the floor and I said, okay, how are these people related, right? So it ends up being Suleika and Mia and Eva. They're all cousins in the same building, you know? And I made them interrelated. And the third time I submitted the book, then I won the Marmot Prize, because now it was like a collection of stories that felt like a novel because all the stories were interconnected. And I was so lucky that one of my favorite writers was actually the judge of that collection that year. So he picked my collection. That's how it happened. Anyway, I think, I'm not totally sure if I lost him because I know he's having some difficulties with the internet. But I see that, I see Dominican Writers is there, but I don't see Infante there. So I don't know.
It seems he got disconnected.
Yeah, he got disconnected. So, you know, so I think that starting there with Benjamin, kind of giving a synopsis of my book is a beautiful place to start, because I was very touched by the fact that he was the judge that year, that he picked my book. That meant a lot to me because I really loved his work and still do. Angie, do you want to continue? Or maybe,
sure.
Maybe there could be questions that the audience has, and this is time for Infante to come back.
Sure. Does anyone have any questions? Has anyone here read the book and have any questions for Annecy before JP comes back?
Because, you know, it's a windy day today. Like, I had a lot of drops today, unusual. Yeah. But the wind is just, it's like a little windstorm up here, at least. So, but right now, you know, Zoom feels pretty steady. It doesn't seem in any way like I'm going to lose, but C's been having some.
Let me see what, Charlotte said it's so hard to call you Dr. Baez.
Yeah, they keep on calling me Dr. Baez, Charlotta.
Eglis wants to know, what is your favorite character from the book? Do you connect more with one character than another?
You know, it was really interesting because I loved the spunkiness of Eva, who did whatever she wanted and was, you know, very self-centered. But throughout the stories, Eva starts in the beginning and then she kind of loses and other people take over the stories. And, you know, for me, stories are like dreams. They're like from the unconscious. So I wrote that book like from a dream place. I wasn't saying I'm going to write this and I'm going to write that. I wasn't writing for anybody. I was just writing because I believed that dreams and stories were somehow related. And so I would kind of like have these dreams and get up and write the story. So, and the characters would develop like that as well. It was like almost like Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. But I liked all of the characters, Mia and Suleika and Eva. Suleika had an innocence to her, and Mia is probably the main character. But the interesting thing is that nobody picks it up. Some students have picked it up, that Mia's name is Inoemia. And I love that name because that name reflected my character, which was, my character was really, and another thing sometimes people don't pick up is that my character was kind of like brought by the father to his home, to his wife, from like an affair. And he called her Mia.
What?
She was his, but the mother decided to call her Inoemia because she wasn't hers. But you know,
wow.
Kind of it comes in and out of the stories. I kind of threw it in there, but I didn't elaborate on it. But some people kind of picked up that little secret there. Another thing is that there were more stories, but in order to make the book a book, I had to delete stories from the book and make it more cohesive. So some stories were deleted, and I think in that deletion, maybe some things were lost, but I still have those stories. I sometimes go back to them.
Wow.
You have a connection to every character because every character represents kind of like an aspect of you, you know, kind of like the ego, the id, and the superego, kind of like each character represents something within. Yeah.
Wow. Give me a sec.
What inspired you to write the book? That's from Giselle. So Giselle, you know, I always, you know, what's interesting is I always wanted to be a writer. I was always interested in writing. It fascinated me that people could sit down and write a book and get into the mind of a character, and I would get into the book. When I read a book, to me, a book was like, they were like my teachers. They taught me so much. And I was raised in the United States, but there was a little point where I went to Dominican Republic. And for some reason, my experience in Dominican Republic was very literary. Like everybody loved literature. I was in a school that enhanced our ability to love literature and poetry and world literature. And then Listín Diario back then was all literature. There was always a little section of poems. And so I was kind of like, my life was very full of literature. But my father didn't feel, my father, at the time, you know, to be a writer was to be a journalist, and he felt that was a dangerous career. And so he kind of didn't support it, but he would, if I wrote a story for like, it was like a contest and I wrote a story and he edited for me, but then he would not completely encourage it. What he said is like, you keep on writing on your own, get a career. And when you get your career and you're done with your degrees, then go write. And that's exactly what I did. I got my bachelor's, my master's, my doctorate. And the day I finished that doctorate, I said, if I could write 257 pages of a dissertation, I could write my stories now. And it gave me permission to begin to write. But it was late in my life, but it was always my preferred love. And it still is. I mean, I'm a therapist and I have a full-time job, but writing has a very special place. And I wish that I could do it more often. And that I could be a faster writer. I write like a story a year and then I edit it for a while and then I save it for, I don't know what, but I do. Because I know there's going to be a time. I'm not in a hurry. Even if I don't know, even if I get old and die, my daughter will have my stories and she'll know what to do with my stories. That's what I say. So I'm not in no rush. I very much nourish and love the process of writing, and I honor it, and I don't treat it like I have to do this or that for other people or publish. I just nourish it. Infante, you're back. We know back. So we kind of like asked for questions and we continued.
All right. I wanted to ask you, because in the story, so you have Mia, right? And she returns back to Santo Domingo, to the Dominican Republic. And it's interesting how she's a writer, right? She calls her daily bread. Right? But it was interesting. She has this relationship with these two men, right? Her father, this is 1972. And while reading it, what I started thinking was like, this is not that long ago. Like the Balaguer's reign is not that long ago. And it was writing was dangerous. So you have the father saying, you know what? You can make your collages. This is a creation, makes these collages. You can make your collages when it comes to the arts, poetry, literature, all that's fine, but nothing political.
Right.
And then there's this older guy, this older kind of creepy guy called Stanley, who tells her like, you're writing, what are you doing writing? Like about politics and journalism, like that's not for women. You have men to do that. So could you speak to how many writers, even though there was that pressure not to write and that writing was a dangerous act, how were you able to get through that as a writer yourself, Annecy, but also Mia, the character Mia, who still ends up writing, even though there's so much pressure for her not to write?
I know, so like my character, and I a lot of the stories have my experience and emotions, but the stories are not totally my stories, but they have come from my own experience. So I was raised in the United States, in New York, in the Bronx, and then I went back to Dominican Republic when I was about 13. And, I didn't know what to expect. I was a Bronx girl. Now in Dominican Republic, my father had a political position, so we were like a political family. And there were some rules and regulations and expectations. And that was very, very odd and very strange and very interesting to me. But at the same time, I had a lot of cousins that I remember, like people in Dominican Republic at that time, if they had political views that were socialists or communists and they wanted to leave the country and go explore in Russia, they left. And I saw relatives leave to Russia. And I was like, I was amazed at their courage and their ability to say, this is what I believe, and that people had real strong views about things. And even though you're a young woman and you cannot express yourself, you're taking in experience and saying to yourself, I have a voice, and I can voice my opinions. And even if my character could do it in her journal. And then what happened was, and what would happen, and you probably know this, you know, well, I don't know, this is 1972. What I remember is, and even now I see it, I can't say there's any difference. There's not very much difference, that many women do defer to their partner. And if their partner says, you know, I don't think you should write, many times some women are confused. Should I write? Should I not write? Some women will write, even if it affects their relationship, or compromise and work it out. And sometimes some people will save the pen and not write. My character made the decision in that story that she wanted to write, and that she would not allow anything to stop her from writing. And I think that my character making that decision in that story was like me making the decision to write the story. Okay, so I couldn't write early on, but because I had to get my degrees and have a career, just like my dad said. But in the end, I said, no, I could start writing, and I could start anew and create community of writers, and that's what I'm going to do. And so Mia kind of was a voice that was within me, that women should be able to write their stories and write despite anything, and that nobody should be able to tell women that they cannot write. But anyway, so let me see the chat. What inspired you to write? So we lost him again, and that's okay, because I know he'll be back. So if anybody has any questions about what I said, and I know exactly what Infante was trying to say about that story, but that story is about how you could be in an oppressive relationship, and an oppressive regime, and an oppressive experience, and how are we going to be, and what are we going to do within those circumstances? Anyway, any questions?
Oh, wow.
Lo perdimos otra vez, Andy.
Sí, sí, eso veo, déjame ver.
Él tiene que estar frustrated con la salida y entrada.
What inspired you to write this book? Did you answer that?
Yeah, what inspired me to write the book was that I always wanted to write. And then after I finished the dissertation, what I did was, I had never taken a creative writing class, and I wrote The Red Shoes. That was my first story. And I took a creative continuing education course, and the teacher there, the faculty, was at NYU. She said, oh my God, I love this story. You should continue to write. And at that time, I didn't know how people wrote. Like, what do? You just write? Like, I didn't really know. So she said, you know, find a group, and you could write in a group. And she explained it to me. And coincidentally, that same week that she said that to me, I went to Barnes and Noble's, and I saw a flyer, and Emily Hanlon, this writer in Tuckahoe, was actually starting a writers group. And there, I went to that group. And it's there in that group, because Emily Hanlon had the same idea that I had about writing. She felt writing came from a real deep place within us. And you allowed it to evolve. So she would ask us questions about each character. And like that, it evolved into another character, and then another character. And like that, I wrote each of the stories in draft format in her group. I was in her group for like 2 or 3 years. But it was primarily Caucasian women from Westchester County, and I wanted more diversity. So then I went to Frederick Douglass on 98th Street. You remember that, Angie?
Yeah, I do.
And you know, believe it or not, there I met 24-year-old Nelly Rosario.
Yeah? Oh, wow.
She had just graduated from MIT and had decided she wanted to be a writer and wanted to go to Columbia.
What?
Yes.
Her Dominican parents must have flipped.
Oh, she did. You could ask her. Anyway, she went.
Nelly no cuenta mucho de su cosa. Hay que sacársela little by little.
I met her, and she was writing her book, Songs of the Water Saint, and then she introduced me to a group in Queens. Daisy Coco de Felipe's had a Dominican writers group in Queens.
Yes,
After like 8 hours, we would go there like at noon. Her husband would cook for us, and it didn't end till like 9 o'clock at night. You know, it was really.
You were like the 5th author, Dominican author of your generation that has mentioned that group to me.
Oh, yes, yes. That group
So Angie tells me that she was also part of that group.
Well, then Nellie introduces me to Angie, who's going to NYU to get her master's in
fine arts.
And then Angie introduces me to Juno, because
yes,
we all be reading at City University of New York, the Dominican Institute, which at the time.
Qué coro, JP. Nosotros we were born a generation later. What we would have given to be in a group with Angie and Nelly and Juno, what those conversations must have been like.
It was really amazing. And then Silvio Torres de Sayam, he just loved literature and supported literature. So when he left, I was really sad because I knew that was not going to happen anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. And so yeah, that's how, and then in that group, I met Marianela Medrano, I met, of course, I met Josefina Baez.
Yeah.
It was an amazing group of people.
Wow, Josefina cuando estaba más jovencita era más tigre.
Yeah. So then, I started writing in 1990s. I didn't finish my book till like 1998. I had all these stories that I would read when I would go out reading, and people would say, oh, you should have a book. You should put it as a book. I was never thinking of a book. I was thinking of writing stories, and stories was the most important thing to me. But so many people that heard me read would want me to put it together in a book. I said, Ma, and then I had Nellie and Angie, and they were like writing a book. So I said, yeah, I should put it as a book. But I knew my distinction. I knew I was different, and how was I going to do this? And so I started, I read a lot. So I read an article again in Poets and Writers about getting your own, being your own editor and getting your own, publishing.
You see, this is what I tell our writers, that Poets and Writers, the magazine and the website offers so many resources, so many resources that everyone should sit down one day and just go through the entire website.
Yeah, even now, like I'm on their list. They send us like a little newsletter. And so they send, just very much like what you do. They send us a creative writing prompt. They send us a poetry prompt, and they send you a creative nonfiction prompt. And those prompts always have links to other things that are really, I find them so interesting. The recent prompts have been just absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. But yeah, they kind of were my guide as to where to go and what to do. Because, I just knew that I had to very much do it on my own, but that also would hurt me in the sense that, when you're with a big publishing company, everybody knows you. When you're with a small company, it's going to be very limited.
Right.
The exposure, and you're really your own marketer.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a full-time job, so I couldn't really market for myself. But also the thing that happened to me, my book came out in 2007, and my editor, who was like my mentor and my supporter, he was dying, and he died right after my book came out. And with that death was my main support. He was actually looking, oh, you should be here, oh, you should do this. So then he passed away, and then right after he passed away, my husband was diagnosed with colon cancer, and so I had to take care of him. But my husband was very supportive, and he would put me down, right, you've got to continue. He didn't want anything to stop me from writing, but I also knew that my commitment was to him, and my love for him was totally committed to helping him through those 3 years of his illness. So my daughter was very supportive, and many times I was out reading or going to an event, and sometimes I find pictures of myself. Like New York Times invited me to an event, and I was there with a few people, and I saw a picture the other day of that event, and I remember how sick my husband was that day, and that my family was helping me out so I could go to that event. So I was torn between going to events and taking care of my husband. So my marketing kind of it was just very, very stressful time and very painful time. And that was from from the moment my book came out, 2007 to 2011, I was taking care of my husband. And then my husband died in 2011, and then I was mourning from 2011 to, you never stop mourning. You know, when somebody dies, they're always going to be in your heart. You're always going to feel that loss, and you recover, but it's a difficult thing. It was difficult those first few years. You don't want to do anything. You don't want to go anywhere. You're just trying to recover from the trauma of loss and taking care of somebody that you've been grieving for like forever. But I did write a lot of stories at that time, and now I take them and I edit them. So I have a few stories about when my husband was dying, and I'm trying to find homes for them, and I know I will. I know I will eventually.
That's powerful, man. You have a really a short piece of vignette titled "The Loss."
Yeah.
It's really, really short, real precise, and it ends with the lines, I wipe my eyes, I walk towards my mother's bedroom to face the facts of what my life has become, one loss after the other. And that resonated with me when I read it, but now listening to you speak, I started thinking about that. Just what it means to one loss after another, and it's something we have to contend with even these difficult times.
Yeah.
But how do you manage? I'm asking you as a therapist, as a writer, how do you manage to continue to create, whether it be writing or collages, considering everything that's going on around you?
Yeah, I think that, you know, when it comes to the trauma of loss, sometimes you have to honor that you cannot write. I think you can't force writing in those moments. You might do something else that's creative to keep on your creative, you know, and for me it's art and collage. So if I'm not writing, I'm doing collage, which I feel is another narrative. You know, it's another narrative that comes from deep within the unconscious. It comes from deep inside. And then you pace it, you know? It's not like, you know, some people can't write at all, and I can't say that I don't write because I'm always writing. I keep a journal, so I always write in the morning, at night, throughout the day. And I have an eye for nature. And so, you know, it's not just like writing is one aspect of my life, and then nature is another aspect, and photography, and then collages is another aspect. And I feel that they all are a form of narrative. You know, that it doesn't have to always be a story or a novel, that we could create in many forms. Society might want to make us conventional, that you're either a writer and nothing else, but I don't really feel that we're so many different, you know, creative beings. Another aspect, and I feel that they all are a form of narrative.
Yeah.
I just kind of heard myself speak back to myself. That was very weird. And
you said what? Could you repeat that? Seeing what in yourself?
I just heard myself speak to myself. Like I just heard
okay.
the last few sentences.
Yeah.
It was really weird. I said, whoa, is that me speaking to myself again? But yeah, so I think that as writers, when we're going through a grieving process, we need to honor the grief and not force ourselves to do any writing. And there are things that we could do to honor that, and at the same time, allow the creative process to be reborn within us again. And that's what I did. I kind of did so many other things, and then I went back to my writing. Luckily, I had a lot of stories that I had written that I could go back and edit and fix, which I still go back, edit and fix. And maybe only recently, like I think in 2015, I did read one of those stories at an event, and I edited it, and Paquita Suarez from CUNY translated it in Spanish for me, and she did like this unbelievable job. I mean, when I read it in Spanish, the way she did it, I was like blown away by it. But they were going to publish it, but I don't think that they've published it. I mean, I gave rights to publication, but I don't think it's been published yet. But that was in 2018, so it's like a very slow process for me.
Oh, wow. Out of the collection, which was the first story that you wrote? Which was the first one?
So you were gone when I said this, but the first story was the red shoes.
The red shoes, okay. I don't know if you spoke about it, but it's I know a lot of our Dominican writers friends, a lot of Dominicans. I think daughters and mothers in general are gonna identify with this. You have Suki and her mother Tati.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, we see their relationship evolve, and then we see Suki as an adult in other stories. But could you speak to just that? What you do so well is showing the interior lives of these characters without them like saying, "Oh, I've been traumatized because of this. I'm angry at my daughter because this and this happened." Right? Like there's this way of like, in a smooth way, through conversation, to the way they react to each other, they play off of each other. You realize that this tension between Suki, the daughter, and the mother Tati.
Yes, yes.
And how it's because they're so similar.
Yes.
Can you speak to that relationship?
Yes, yes. I love the relationship between them too, because the mother is like every mother in my family, she's gonna let you have it, she's gonna let you have it, she's gonna be honest, and you're gonna be like, oh my God, and that, the Red Shoes was the first story. And what's interesting about the Red Shoes, whenever I've gone to, like, if somebody's using my book in a class, I went to BCC and they were using it in a class, and a young guy said to me, I know this story is about a young woman in shoes. He says, but I related to it a lot. And he said, when I was young, I wanted these sneakers, but my dad felt they were too ghetto and I would get in trouble. And he had another idea of what sneakers he wanted for his son. And it became a big fight over these sneakers. He says, I could write my own story just about this event. And I said, write it, because guys don't write about these things, It's like, but it was amazing. It was, the things that guys tell me when I do readings, how they relate to the stories, I'm always like really deeply impressed, because it's universal experience, that we experience these experiences. It doesn't matter if we are female or male, we have our own version of it. Once I read The Red Shoes in a psychoanalytic conference, and people came to me from different countries to tell me stories about shoes related to their country, like what kind of shoe they
Right.
So that was interesting, that there was even diverse what's not okay in different countries about what a woman can wear as a shoe, right?
That's right. That's wild.
It's a very sexual object,
What's also wild is also, like, you have these parents, right, who are doing their best to protect their children, right, to protect their daughters. And in that protection, there's control, right?
Yeah.
But it's almost like they're being overprotective, and in the process, they're almost making their kids more vulnerable. Like, there's a line that encapsulates it in a way on page 100 in the short story, Amor es, Love is. Mia says, sex has not even been on my mind when it comes to Stanley, but now that they put it there like a seed, it begins to grow. So this, like, not necessarily obsession, but this preoccupation with, like, yo, be careful with men. He wants you for this, he wants you for that. Yeah. And then now he starts considering it, okay, this is on me.
So true. That is so true. I always believe that parents were doing and saying things that were not even close to what we were thinking. And yet now we had it in our minds when we never had it. That's right. And I don't know where they got it from somewhere, I'm sure, their own experiences. But in the end, it's all about protection. Like My Daughter's Eyes is all about, us loving our children and what's going to happen, that there's all this stuff going on, because in the end, it's about her own daughter. What's going to happen to my daughter? Is she going to experience suffering like I did? Is she going to experience betrayal like I did? Because remember, when I decided I'm going to make the collection cohesive, Poets and Writer had an article that said, take all the stories down, put them in an order, and then review the last story and see if the last story has something to do with the beginning. And I took the last story, My Daughter's Eyes, split it in two, and took half of it and put it as the beginning and the other half as the end. It's called something, Bookend something. It has a name, which was, so you have Mia's daughter looking at her mother, meditating and wanting to ask the mother something. So she wants the mother to let her wear some eyeliner. And she's wondering what her mother hides from her. What are the stories that her mother doesn't tell her? And then all the other stories are related to the stories the mother never tells her, her experiences as an adolescent. And then it ends again with her daughter, who's 13, just like her in the beginning of the stories, thinking the things that she thought. I want to see this boy in the Bronx, and I want to do, you know, she's thinking all the things that she wants to do, and she wants to be beautiful. And the mother's just worried. What's going to happen to her? What does the future hold? You know, I did a reading in Pennsylvania, and somebody said, "Oh, it'd be nice to write about those characters, and you know, how are they doing?" You know.
There's a theme, or it just comes up a lot. Secrets, right? Secrets, whether it be illness, like people are dying, people are not really addressing it in any way. Whether it be certain family members or maybe pedophiles, but it's not directly stated in any way, and a lot of people might not know. And there's a story that you have titled Aura. It's like this bruja woman, this powerful woman. But in reading the story, she's almost like a healer, almost like a therapist per se, almost like in a different context. But she's very much a therapist. Could you speak a little bit about that character in that story, Aura?
Yeah. You know, Aura represents the aspect of my family that's very spiritual and believes in the afterlife and all those spiritual things, you know. So I have one group of family, they're very evangelist, and all this thing is devil worship, and the other side is very spiritual and they believe in everything, you know. And I love that. I was raised with women that believed in the power of prayer and the power of incense and sage, and I value that. And Aura, like many women in my family, came with that aura, right? With that aura of spirituality. And I wanted to, you know, my thought in my second book that I was writing at the time before my husband got sick was going to be a continuation of that theme in terms of spirituality, because it was something that I value a lot, because I feel that kind of spirituality is like psychotherapy. It's indigenous, it's old, it's ancient, and it's part of my life, and I value it very much. And actually, I was reading before today. I was reading her again. I was reading those that because she teaches her about her power, and that her power could be in the spiritual, you know. And she had not met anybody like the power that Aura had, and she didn't realize that she could have that power too. And in suffering, she found that she had that power because the father, you know, in that story, the father wants her to talk, but she decides she's never going to speak again because the father beat her family, humiliated her, and she decides she's never going to speak again. And he's trying to make her speak. And Aura is doing her spiritual thing to make her speak, but the father goes and takes her everywhere. Whatever she wants, she could buy. And so she buys a Ouija board, and she's like, oh, wow, now I could speak to the dead. You know, I could actually speak to the other side, you know. And she realizes that she has the power, kind of like psychic ability or whatever, comes from that suffering, that ability to see beyond. And I love that about that character, about Mia, and about Aura, and what she learns from Aura. And Aura brings the Taínos and brings the Ciguapa, you know, and brings all those things from our culture that are so beautiful. You know, everybody grew up with the Ciguapa. I mean, I would hear her at night with her long hair, sweeping in the kitchen, you know. It's like, and I never wanted to meet her. I really did not want to bump into her little backward legs, you know. But Aura brings her all of that, you know, brings her to all that that Dominican spirituality that I love so deeply.
Yeah. What's powerful is with Aura, she's with these young girls, these adolescent girls, and she's working to get el doctor, right, to heal el doctor.
Yes.
From the Sangano spirit, right?
Yes, the Sangano spirit.
So, and el doctor, and what's powerful about the fact that throughout the story, they reference him el doctor, and that really reminded me of the Dominican experience, where if you're a licenciado, an abogado, a doctor, like it's almost like the door's open. You can come into my home. Oh, be with my family, be with my children, because you have that title. There's another part too where the daughter's Mia's trying to convince the father to let her go to some misa, but he's scared because for whatever reason, and she's saying, oh, this lawyer's daughter's gonna be there, this doctor's daughter is going to be there. So this idea that the title almost not only defines you, but also like absolves you from any like
Oh my God.
negative traits, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's so true. I agree. You know, what I learned about, I mean, when I wrote the book, I was a director of a program that was primarily all sexual abuse. All the children that came to me had been sexually abused. So I came to writing because I wanted to have something that could balance me from all the stories of abuse that I was hearing. I mean, writing was always there, but then it became a place for me to find some solace. And for 10 years, I did sexual abuse treatment work with families. And so I knew how the perpetrator thought, and I knew which perpetrators could get away with things. And the perpetrators that get away with things are the doctors, the lawyers, the physicians, right? The preachers, you know. If they believe in God, nobody believes that they could possibly sexually abuse children. And the perpetrator knows this. So he knows that he has easy access to children that he could abuse because he has something that, you know, especially, you know how many preacher fathers I saw that sexually abused their children? And they were like, you know, they had a community behind them saying no. Or they had new wives with children. And I'm like, wow, you know, that believed in them. So in creating the doctor, I wanted to create a character that people would actually trust because he had something that protected him from, you know, and he's a gynecologist kind of doctor. So also, you know, he's not gonna do anything, but yeah, he's an interesting character. And yes, they want to heal him to take away, because, you know, in Dominican folklore, I had read and I had spoken to some elders that, you know, that they believe that men don't sexually abuse. They just have a spirit that goes inside them and want to sexually abuse, but they don't want to. It's the spirit. So you could take the spirit out and maybe cleanse them, right? So in the story, they want to cleanse him from this desire to hurt children so that he won't hurt children. But so far he's tried to hurt everybody and has hurt a couple of the children and the family, but nobody knows what's going on.
What's really wild also is where when it comes to El Doctor, like this is a blatant pedophile. You're reading, you see him as a monster, right? But then there's another character, Stanley, right? Who's an older guy, 22, 23, but it would be statutory rape almost, like consensual quote unquote relationships, but the girlfriend is like 16, 17. So initially you're like, this is off. But what's scary is how it takes a while to, at least for me personally, it took a while for me to register, okay, Stanley's dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. This is another form of like a transgression that's really deviant. It's like, he's just as dangerous. He's another kind of monster, but his shield or mask is just, he's relatively younger, right?
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, I saw that a lot. I mean, I'm sure this still happens in the Dominican Republic, but I grew up in a time where, you know, in Dominican Republic, where older men wanted young girls and they married young girls. And, you know, some mothers were happy that so-and-so is interested in their young daughter because he has money or he has title. But my father was never into that. My father was very strict and very in control. And so if you called the house and you sounded too old, he would be like, that guy's older. You can't talk to him, you know? And he would tell me, you know, you could talk to guys that are your age, but you're not talking to a man over 20. And he would guide me as to what is not appropriate. However, you know, here I was, a flat-chested girl, too skinny at 15, beyond skinny, and yet every guy over 20 was interested in me, you know?
You have a line where something like, they like them young, just like clay, so they can mold them, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Training really and there's a story where you speak about El Doctor and with transgressions, what he does. It's titled Pinocchio, a really short piece, and about sexual abuse. But it was not, I want to say an easy read, but I don't know how I want to figure out how did you know that you weren't giving too much, that it wasn't too heavy for the reader, put the book down, like it was the right. How did you strike that balance of like these are some really dark acts, but
Yes.
you have to tell this story? How did you balance so that the reader didn't throw the book away? You know,
What's interesting about that story, Infante, is that I had this. So I would do these little projects with myself. Oh, this summer I'm going to write stories in Spanish only. And then I'm only going to write 1,500 words in Spanish. That was like the practice for the summer. Because since I worked really heavy in the fall and in the spring, I would write a lot in the summer, edit in the fall and spring, and then write again in the summer. That was my process, my writing process. So I wrote that story. Some stories I said I'm going to write in Spanish. And that was one of them that I wrote in Spanish, then translated into English. And then in order to force me to be very careful how I was going to craft the story without being too vulgar or too, putting too much out there. And then I also felt that it should be 1,500 words, which would be 5 pages to read out loud, and that it wouldn't have too much context that was too sexual, so that I could publicly read it in front of an audience without anybody feeling shocked. Because I felt at the time that I was doing research on sexual abuse and writing about sexual abuse, but a story everybody could read, but research only researchers were going to read. And I wanted people to know how the abuser abuses. And you saw in Pinocchio, he buys them a gift, he offers them a gift, and he also engages them in play. And this I learned from Perpetrator and working with perpetrators, how they sexually abuse children, and also working with children, how they were sexually abused. For many children, it was always within the context of play and gifts. And so he's trying to do that, but it gets stopped because grandma is cooking and they have to go eat. But he does tell them, this is a secret, don't tell, because he knows that what he's doing is wrong. But the girls go and tell, but then the grandma says, how dare you tell me that? That's not true. And because of that, I'm going to punish you. And then they make a decision, you know what, from now on, we can't tell people what we do with him. We got to keep it a secret. So right there, they're vulnerable for sexual abuse because parents don't know that if a child tells you this, believe it.
That's powerful. And what's the first time I read the short story, I went in with not necessarily any particular lens, but this time I considered the opening, the quote that you used from The Adventures of Pinocchio.
Yes.
And I'll just read it really quickly. There are a lot of shoulds that happen in this world, which means there are a lot of things that happen that shouldn't have, right? And then I started just considering that. And then with Pinocchio, and if you consider the story of Pinocchio, at least the Disney movie, I haven't read the novel, but in the Disney movie, so much of it is he wants to be a good boy, quote unquote. And looking at your collection through that lens, you have these young girls who they want to be good girls. They want to be good. They want to impress their parents. They want to be good. But it's not as easy as a fairy tale where it's sort of like there's some distinct good and evil to choose from. It's a lot messier than that. But yet they still have the same struggle or a conflict that Pinocchio has of becoming a real or a good girl or good acceptable. Someone's acceptable.
Yeah, and Pinocchio, what happened with Pinocchio is that children would tell me how the perpetrator would read stories to sexually abuse them. And Pinocchio was a perfect story because Pinocchio is a liar and his nose grows every time he lies. And in this story, Pinocchio, the perpetrator wants the children to kiss his Pinocchio after reading, the story, So it's all about, lies. And then they tell the truth to the grandma. The grandma thinks they're lying. She takes away the virgins that he's given them, the virgin representing innocence. But, the interesting thing is that when I was young, I loved fairy tales and I loved mythology, Greek mythology and all that. And so when I started to write these stories, they would evolve very deep from my own conscious and my dreams. But I noticed when I finished the collection how much fairy tale was in each story. The Red Shoes is a fairy tale. The story where my character doesn't want to speak and sleeps forever is Sleeping Beauty. Pinocchio is again a childhood story that I saw as I was reading my own collection, I said, wow, this is a fairy tale. This is like, you know, but in a more modern, more kind of like adult version of these stories. But they all have that kind of quality. So, you know, when you brought that up, that just reminded me of that.
Also, in you have the short story The Timekeeper, which has allusions to Cinderella.
Right,
And
exactly.
it really captures like this beautiful relationship between father and daughter.
Yep.
Where sort of it's complicated and it's, but there's a line that really got me where it goes he protected Mia from the reality she herself tried to deny. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like at the cusp of adolescence of like Mia's realized there's more out there. There's danger. She wants to go into the forest, let's say. Mm-hmm. But the father's telling her, can't be careful. There's wolves out there.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit about the adolescent voice, right? Or just the adolescent voice. How do you write an adolescent, sometimes in the first person, without showing too much? So they're limited in their knowing and their being because they're adolescents, but yet you want the reader to follow along and see their development and growth. How did you go about writing Mia?
I think that's the beauty of writing, is being able to get into character. And I think that's also the hardest thing when you're writing, when you're working full time and not writing full time, where the characters would follow me and they would speak in my head. I could hear their voices in a way. I could hear and feel their thinking. It was like if they were part of me, and then I would write. But, you know, I found myself writing in meetings, writing everywhere I was, you know, like the stories. When you're a writer, it doesn't leave you. It goes with you. And meanwhile, you have a full-time job and you have to do things. So I'd be writing, like, I'd be like in court waiting to like type, you know, to go to court about a sexual abuse case, but I'd be writing and you know, and I'd find myself like distracted because all I wanted to do was write and follow the voices. It was about hearing the voice and really going deep. You know, writing is about going deep into our own prior experience. So it requires a lot of memory and going back to almost a past and being there and hearing those voices. You know, I also, even as a teenager, kept copious notes of everything I did as an adolescent. So,
okay, well that's.
I even have a slang book. I have a slang book from 1970 something when I was in El Colegio Santo Domingo with my friends. All the crazy things that we did.
I forget the name of there's a story where Mia's a lot older and she's I think it's not Zuleika. I think it's Como se dice success in, no, Casarte.
Casarte, yeah.
In 1986. And just she has this community, like these people who's from the island, but they're here now and they're like they're connecting, and all these artists. Could you? I mean, you might have touched on it earlier when you were talking about Angie and Nelly. Could you speak to the importance of just having that community of creatives?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Casarte was a story I wrote in memory of my love for Josefina Baez.
Oh, yeah, right.
And Josefina, back then had done, back in the 90s, Josefina did a Casarte, and I was the first house she went to do her Casarte. And it was a fun time. You know, the 90s was a fun time when I met Nelly and Angie. And I suddenly, so here I was a sexual abuse therapist, because that's what I did when I met them, trying to look for a community that was literary and alive and fun, and that I could leave these voices of sexual trauma that I was hearing every day and working with families, right? And now I had this beautiful community of writers that were doing really exciting things. And I had a house on this like 200-acre estate in Yonkers, because I was the director of the program. I had a house on the estate. And so we would do all kinds of things there that were fun. Like every Christmas, we would do a tree trimming, and people would actually, I never trimmed a tree. People would bring me gifts. Everybody was competing which trimming they were going to bring, you know? And, you know, we would do readings, we would do Casarte, and it was just beautiful. You know, 2011 and people getting older and moving and getting married changed all that. And the community split. You know, Nelly went to Texas, Angie went to Texas, and everybody just split. And And then that community that we had, Daisy Coco de Felipe, who used to have the Tertulia, left to become the president of University in Connecticut. So that community was gone. And it was kind of sad. And, you know, and then we never had that again. I mean, I'm sure they had it within their own communities, wherever they were. But what I remember, and then my daughter, she's probably here, all she remembers is how much fun she had as a kid. Because it was like live and poetry and fun, you know? So she tells me, she's like, oh, wow, I had a really great childhood, you know, because she met all these incredible people.
That's beautiful. I want to ask you, as a therapist, writer, you wear both of those hats. A lot of writers, a lot of people here listening, I just thought of this because I saw Alicia Santos signed in.
Alicia, I love Alicia. I love her courage and her spunkiness.
So I was thinking, like, when a lot of us, myself included, whether we know it or not, we're writing from dark experiences, maybe traumatic experiences, dark places, and we want to put it on the page. How does one go about that? Because as beautiful as that might be, to like write about those experiences, deconstruct them, make sense of them, maybe to understand them, it can also lead to some dark places, and it could also be make you extra vulnerable, right? It's difficult to get through. How does one write about these experiences in a productive way, right? In a healthy way?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, one thing that I've learned about people is that I trust the strength within them and their resilience to be able to know when to, you know, how to be with that, you know. And I also love people like Alicia, who will really be honest about a lot of things. And that honesty is courageous and impressive. But I worry when people have had trauma experiences and they're writing about trauma, and then the public wants them to go about sharing too much of their trauma. And I, as a therapist, am very protective of them, because that's a private experience and they have to have the ability to want to share it if they want to, and to say no if they don't want to. But the public is like, oh, I read this and I want you to share this and I want you to talk to me about that. Well, no, I don't have to. You know, I don't have to if I don't want to. And sometimes when you've had a trauma experience, your ability, your will has been taken away. Something has happened to you. And now you're in the public sharing very personal things, and the public might want to will you into sharing more than you need to. And I think the writer needs to know when they're okay with saying, you know what, you know, right now I'm not ready to share a lot of that. I could, or they might not want to. Like I wrote about sexual abuse because I was a sexual abuse trauma therapist. Do you know how many people thought that story was about me? Yeah. You know, a lot of people, and wanted me to kind of speak to it as if it was about me. But, you know, I don't have to tell you it's about me or not about me. Why can't we take the story as it is and us talk about the story and the content? You know, why do I have to go to the me? I might not want to. I might want to talk about the craft of the telling, or I might want to talk about it. It depends. I think people should have a choice. Mm. You know, I don't want to say, oh, you should never do that, because that's not true. I think people should have a choice. Some people might be very comfortable and feel that their goal is to share these experiences with others so they could learn. And I honor that. And other people might want to protect themselves a little bit and talk about the craft. And I honor that. I think we should just know who we are. And I trust that their strength and their resilience will let them know what's okay and at what time. Right?
Yeah, on that same lane, I guess. When it comes to the writer and the reaction of the public, how the public is going to take it or whatnot. In your collection, you have some Spanish that's translated or explained, and you have other phrases in Spanish that are not explained at all. They might be in italics, but they're not explained. You just have to figure it out through context. And I've led some writing workshops, even been part of certain writers' workshop, where in our own community, that's almost frowned upon. It's almost like, oh, you're explaining it, you're defining it for someone else. And there's a lot of tension, especially for some writers of my generation, where it's sort of like everyone has to do the Junot Diaz thing, where it's sort of like it's not italicized. If they don't understand, fuck it. But then you have instances where you want to do that, but then the pressure from everyone else in the room is almost like, should I explain this? Should I not? Could you speak to like when did you decide to explain it? When did you decide to just leave it as is?
Well, you know, we were like only 5 Dominicans writing at the time. I must have been the 5th. I never thought about what people would think.
Mm.
I never did. I also never had those pressures. I was not considered, I was like an anomaly. Like I was writing because I wanted to write. Like I didn't have pressure of what people are going to think or not think, or are they going to like it or not like it. I didn't, like, writing was not my full-time job that I lived for. So I didn't have that kind of pressure that other people might have, where it's about their presence and what people are going to think, and how I was so lucky to be almost in the background, being able to do what I wanted. And even now, you know, when I decided, you know what, I want community again, where is the community that I want to be involved with? I want to hear what people are doing. I want to hear different voices. I want to see what people are struggling with. When I decided to come out and do that, I did it. But I did realize, once I got my book published, I realized how much people are in the, what people are going to say. Oh, I couldn't believe it, Infante. Like, I went to a reading and the guy's like, who do I know? How far away have I read? I said, really? That means I'm good if I read California? Like, I didn't know the writing world was so competitive. And, you know, who do you know? Who supports you? So if this person doesn't support me, I'm not good enough. I know who I am as a person. I don't need somebody else to support me as a person for me to be good or not. But I realized that the world is like that, and that the world of writing was very different than the other world. I had this like vision when I was younger that it would be different, but I realized, you know, so some people will be your friend if you're like writing prolifically and it's published and people are talking about you, and dump you as fast as they know you if you're not that prolific. You know, I'm like, I don't need any of that. So yeah, then if you write in Spanish versus English, you know,
There's that, yeah.
I like all those kinds of things. You know, I was neither Dominican nor American, nor Dominican American, nor American, nor Dominican. So then I decided to just be me, you know, because here I'm not this. And I've been in readings where Dominicans, where I'm the oppressor and I'm white. And I'm like, what? I'm white and oppressive? You know, and so I've been through like this and that. And so at this point, it's like, you know, freedom comes when being able to just be who you are authentically and honoring who you are, and not being attached to those outcomes, you know, to what are they going to say if this and that, because that could totally block your writing.
Yes, it
I
can.
think last time we talked about, yeah, people are going to have a lot of issues. If they're thinking about others a lot, they're not going to be able to just write their story the way they can write it. And that's why I value courageous writers who write what's coming from their gut and honor it.
Let's go. That's powerful. I love that. And it got me thinking about success. So that's a form of success, of éxito, to be able to write what's inside and just putting it on there at the risk of the whatever people might think. And in the ending of Cómo se dice success in Spanish, the last paragraph in page 151, it goes, éxito, mía thought. Éxito was a great word for success. Éxito sounds like exit in English. Mía thought of éxito. She thought of X and X's. The things one ends or takes out of one's life, the things one leaves behind, no matter how attached one is. To Mia, that meant success, to be able to know when to stay and when to leave, to have the courage to live beyond loss, to have the courage to say, I will go on. They laughed, and Suki said, éxito. And really quick, and then Mia actually says this last thing. She goes, you know that a woman needs to learn to be on her own, Mia said, and she added, you can say love sucks, you know, but it sucks because you want it to suck. But love can be beautiful. Love can be peaceful. Now, I bring that up quickly because a lot of us creatives have this attachment to like, oh, we need to be suffering. We need to be out of it in order to create good art. This is myth that we've internalized because of Hollywood or whatever.
Yes.
And some of us, maybe Catholicism too, where sort of we have to suffer. If it comes easy, it's no good. It has to be if it feels good, it has to be bad.
Yes.
So speak a little bit about éxito and just like
you know, I mean, when you read that back to me, it really like touched me. It's like I almost cried. Because, you know, you summarized everything I was saying by reading that piece from that story, which is, it's all about attachment. We suffer because we're so attached, you know? And how can we, you know, but at the same time, I understand that if writing is your life and you're going to be making money and you have all this, you know, thing that you have to do. But I do feel that when you relax from that attachment, there's freedom. When you do your craft because you know and you value that part of you inside that is so wise, it's like almost like a downloading of information. We're all going to have a downloading of information, of knowledge, of stories that are unique to us. Your story is not going to be my story. The universe is full of stories so that we have all the ability to write our own stories in our way that's unique, without any need to feel that we have to be, you know, Diaz or, you know, Julia Alvarez, or, you know, that you have to be you. Like, you know, that I'll read your work and I know that's you, that I'll read Alicia's work, I'll know that's her. Like that everybody's so unique in their voice and their language and their storytelling. And that the world is abundant, you know, but I do know that there are things that happen in the world that are uncomfortable, that make you kind of pause or block you a little bit. And it's how are we going to deal with those blocks when they happen and see them for what they are. Attachment, you know, what are they going to say? What are they going to think? You know, in the beginning, when I started writing, and this happens to many writers that are here today, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to read that story. Are they going to think it's me? You know, and then you got to deal with that. So you're always dealing with something, you know, and it's okay if they think it's you, and then you get over it, you know. So writing is also kind of like developmental. You go through all these stages of what are they going to think? Okay, fine, got over that. Now this, then you go through another like hurdle. Like there's so many different hurdles that we go through, you know. For me, sometimes it was reading, you know, if I went to a reading and what was going to happen, what were they going to say? Because, you know, you would end up meeting a lot of strange people, or they would get, you know, nasty, or you never knew what was going to happen in a reading in New York City, you know. But then I got courageous. Then you get courageous. You're like, you know what, stuff's going to happen and you're going to be able to manage it or handle it or whatever. Especially if you're a woman, you know, like guys could go read and curse and all that, but back then, you know, it was not, it was, you know, there's a privilege in being a male.
Yeah. No, to this day, and even in terms of just time. So if you're a mother, let's say you're a mother, and you want to take time to write, then that you're a mother. But also if you're a daughter, the expectations of a daughter in general, but in the Dominican context in particular, are just different, right? So there's always this, especially in working class in general, no matter the gender. So there's this guilt with taking time to write, which seems inconsequential, but then it's exacerbated by the fact that you're a woman, by the fact that you're a daughter taking care of family, by the fact that you're a mother taking care of your own family. How did you go about like getting through that?
That's so funny that you mentioned that, because even though my husband was supportive, I would wake up at 5 a.m. to write so that I wouldn't disturb anybody. And so that at night I would go to bed with him because I couldn't stay up late writing, right? And I would notice that about me and say, wow, even in this period, in this time, we're in modern society. And writing was like a lover that I had on the side and that I saw on the sneak. So supportive.
That's wow.
You know, because if I did it, he'd be like, you know, what's up? You know, you're always writing, you know, we're not going to bed. When are you going to bed? Huh? However, you know, when he was very sick and he was dying, he would, I had a room for him that needed a special bed. And he would say, why don't you sit and write next to me? I love it when you write.
Wow, okay. That's just powerful. But it is interesting. I don't know if it just comes with experience, or if this comes, you just have this, or maybe your academics, what you studied. But you not that you have a handle of death, but there's an acceptance of death, right? And I'm just thinking this just because of the time that we're in. When the news started showing that, you know, the coronavirus, this death is a reality. You had people buying toilet paper. You had people acting in all these strange ways because they were confronted with death. Like, this is it. Like, death is a reality. And it seems like in this book, and just speaking to you now, like, not that I don't know how to phrase it, not that you have a handle of death, but an acceptance of loss. Like, what can you speak to that, especially in these times where sort of like losses are happening, we are losing people. Death is a reality. I don't know how else to put it. There's almost like this denial of death in a lot of us, myself included, where it's difficult to confront that.
I know. I mean, all I do in the past few months or weeks is talk about death with people, because death has been, this is the first time in history where the therapist is encountering the same thing that her client is encountering at the same time, right? So I'm the therapist in the same situation as my client. We're both anxious, afraid, struggling with whatever issues. So it's a time of the most deepest honesty and authenticity with a client, that we're in the same situation. So we're going to talk about these things, about death. I have many clients angry at God for doing, religious clients angry at God for doing these things, and angry at God that God didn't answer their prayers and save their loved ones, right? And I've been in that place too. So, that deep understanding of love for God and anger, and, all this is happening. It's a very existential time when it's about how do we find meaning, and how are we going to live our lives? What attitude are we going to have in the face of so much loss and pain? And I read a lot of the work of Viktor Frankl. He lost his family in the Holocaust, lost everybody, his mom, his dad.
Man's Search for Meaning, right?
Yes, Man's Search for Meaning, yeah. And he said, in the end, the Nazis could not take his will to find meaning, even at the end of life, even in that moment, in that crisis, and so my work is helping clients reframe their experience and find meaning, even in the most deepest, painful experience at this moment, and be able to look at what really matters. Like the other day, so talking about death with clients in the past few weeks, I had this dream that God came to visit me, and he had like a limo outside, and his doorman came, his driver, his chauffeur came and knocked at the door, and he said, God is here and he'd like to speak to you. He wants to explain. That was it. That was a dream. And I knew that in some way it was like explain about why everything is happening the way it's happening, and I woke up, so I never knew what God wanted to explain, but I thought it was really interesting, because it's a time to kind of like, we're doing so much reflection and so much going in and really looking at things. And it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. Grieving is a process, and then you have to let it be, and then you come to a new conclusion, but it takes time. So it's a very interesting time to be in, and to also to write. Like sometimes I'm here, or I'm writing, or I'm doing things that are pleasurable, but I know that on this side is all this pain and suffering, right? And I feel the joy of what I'm doing, but also the suffering of what's going on. And in between, there's a little guilt and a little sense of privilege that I can be socially distant, that I can be in this safe place, knowing that other people can't. And so we're constantly going back and forth. And I think if we deny that back and forth, we're going to get very anxious and depressed. But if we allow ourselves to realize that we're in this situation and be honest with ourselves, that we're both like in the loss, and one day in the joy, and one day in the loss, like that, I think it allows for more acceptance. And you're right, Infante. I've had a lot of losses. Like every year there has been, I don't think there's been a year where I have not had a loss, a profound loss. And, so at this point it's like, okay, then how am I going to be despite losses and despite, all these things that are happening in the world right now.
And this is, before I turn it to, just guys, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. I'm going to read them. And when it comes to that, just going back on that, the idea of loss, where throughout the collection, there's a lot of loss. There's a lot of loss of innocence, loss of life, loss of what we think are who our parents are, what they should be. There's throughout the book, there's that. But at the same time, throughout that loss, there's a lot of beauty, a lot of laughter, a lot of realizations. When you consider these moments with mother and daughter and father, where through all the drama, through all the messiness, like there's still a light at the end of the tunnel. There's still like there's this sense of optimism, this sense of like, there's a survival. Life is survival. It's about survival.
Yes, I agree.
Just want to questions. Let me see what people chat. Let me see any questions. If you guys have any questions, please. Éxito. Make your own pass.
Alicia says, yeah, 5 a.m. Yes. Yeah, Alicia, she has her workshop at 5 a.m. She knows.
We should ask that questions. Dime, Alicia, you have any questions? Oh my God, so many. My questions, but she says my heart is full. Do you this day and time? What time do you wake up to write? Do you have a pattern?
Do I have a pattern? I don't wake up anymore that early, but I do wake up early. I wake up at 6:37, and I do have a ritual. I have my little ritual that I do in my writing, and I always have like a list of like little baby goals, what I'm going to achieve today. And if I don't achieve it, I move it to the night. And then at night, I move it I keep a little track because, I'm not just a writer. I'm a professor, I'm a psychotherapist. And then out of the blue in November, I ended up becoming the president of a non-for-profit, just interim until June. But that took a lot of my time and a lot of my writing space. And so I'm hoping that I could go back to how things were before I took over the non-for-profit. So.
All right, Alicia has a question for us. Alicia, Angie, could you unmute Alicia? I'm trying to, ¿cómo se? Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Annecy. Hi,
Alicia.
My heart is so full. Like, I caught this talk right on time, truly, like right on time. I just finished speaking to a graduating class who they're so nervous about the future. They're so nervous. There's so much uncertainty. They're worried about getting jobs and what the market's even going to look like. Graduating under, they just got their bachelor's. And so how do you hold all the grief? How do you write the grief? How do you prepare to write grief is the question on my heart.
Yeah.
Thank
you. For me is sometimes some people might not be able to write, but some people might be able to just sit down and just share that in small little pieces of 500 words, small, tiny pieces, somebody sent me the other day, a professor wrote an article of asking their students to write a piece that to sit for a minute, for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and just sit and hear everything around them and then write about it. And then he compiled all those little beautiful pieces of the students. So, it's New York City, it's CUNY University. So the students came from different backgrounds, and all of them in the midst of all this fear and uncertainty just sat for 4 minutes. It's a John Cage thing, 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And they wrote whatever they were hearing, the birds or the sounds or, so it's about giving structure to the writing, about whatever is happening at that one moment. And so I did the experiment of the 433, and I sat one morning and just sat there and just allowed to experience whatever was happening and then wrote it. I haven't sent it in to 433. 433 is actually a journal that's looking for little pieces, and 433 pieces as well. I think it's, and you're good at this, Alicia, it's giving them prompts, but prompts that allows them to be able to share the grief in ways that also respects their boundaries about how much they can share or not share. I mean, I teach also, and I'm good at wanting everybody to tell me how they're doing, but I also know that not everybody can share that at this time. So I only open it for discussion with whoever can share. And,
Right.
and also I'm participating right now with a group of writers on a healing and writing workshop. And the way that we're doing the writing of for healing grief is not by sharing the grief, but we write about the grief, but we share about the process of writing about the grief with the group.
Mm.
Got it?
Yes, I
Because
love that.
the research shows that for somebody to share or openly share about the trauma of grief openly might not be where they're at, but they could share about, wow, what happened to me. And it's a 4-part process. So you write and then you reflect and you reflect on the reflection.
Oh, I love that.
You got it? Yeah,
That's beautiful.
it's really cool. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And is your workshop a private workshop? That healing workshop?
The healing and writing, that's
Mhm.
somebody else's workshop from a institute that I'm involved in, therapeutic writing, but it's not something I'm doing right now.
Oh,
But
how
Annecy,
beautiful. If you do that, I would take it.
We're working on your workshop.
Oh yeah, you know, so I was gonna, so believe it or not, guys, I was going to do a workshop in May. It was titled "Telling Your Story About Trauma, Grief, and Illness," right? And then all of this happened, and you know, I thought, wow, should I or shouldn't I? You know, and it has a lot of different prompts in the areas of trauma, grief, and loss. I mean, it could be a longer series of a workshop because there's a lot of prompts for all the areas. And it comes from the work of this incredible woman who writes about trauma, illness, and loss. But I was just going to do like an overview with one example in each area. Yeah, we'll still work on it, Angie. I would still love to do it.
I think people really need it at the moment.
Yes. Yeah,
And, yeah, I think it's very important in this moment in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions? No more questions. I guess in closing, there's not any more questions. In closing, Annecy, based on, I think Eileen had this question about how do you want the characters to resonate with readers. I'll focus the question a little bit. What did you want, or what do you think, or how do I phrase this? What do you want the reader to take away from Mia's relationship with her mother and how she views her mother, and the way her mother views Mia?
Well, I mean, Eileen's question is about, you know, I think, you know, what's interesting about writing is that I didn't sit down to write a book about these women so that it could resonate a particular way. I wrote it and then I let the book tell me what it wanted to share. Do you get it?
That makes perfect sense.
Okay. And then what I realized was that the book was talking about the trauma that is to be a woman, you know, and the trauma of what it is to be a woman. You know, immigration is not easy. It can be very traumatic. And I didn't write about childhood experiences of things I remember about immigration and crazy things that happened. But, you know, parents get more stricter when they are in another country because of fear than they could be in their own country, you know? And then politics, I think we are all socio-political beings. We are the product of the social political culture of the time. And so I think of myself in 1972 in Dominican Republic. It was really crazy. It was a really crazy time, you know? And so parents were very strict, and all this traumatic event is happening around us that is in some way or another forming us. And the same is probably happening to my daughter right now. And the same thing will happen to my little grandson. He already talks about COVID. I'm afraid of COVID, Grandma, you know? And he's 6 years old. And so, you know, I feel that as a writer, and for the writers here, let the stories be written and let the characters speak for themselves and let other people find meaning in what the characters are saying. You know, some people have written stuff about my work and I'm like, wow, you got that from that? Wow, that's amazing. I love it. I love when I see that happen, because the characters will speak to each person differently. It's not what I hope for the characters to say, but what people take. Or when people write to me, I save every letter that I've ever received. I have like a little packet of letters about what the stories meant to them. You know, I even had one person found me on Facebook and she said, you know, I'm so glad that I read your book. My father bought it for me at a reading that you did. Luckily, he didn't read it. Because probably he would not have let her, because like some publisher said, I had adolescent girls and children in sexually compromising situations. That was one of the publishing issues that I had adolescent girls, it won't be able to be used in high schools or, and some high schools have used it because children are in compromising situations right now, like it or not. They are.
Yeah. And what's crazy is that ironically, that's almost echoes or mirrors a lot of the adults in the collection where they have these secrets. They want to protect their kids. They want to hide this reality that the kids are already exposed to.
Oh yeah. Students went and defied in Bronx Community College. I went to read once and all the students defied the professors that didn't want them to read Pinocchio, and they read Pinocchio. And then they asked me about Pinocchio. They already had told me, do not talk about Pinocchio because Pinocchio is not la la la. Some people had issues with Pinocchio. And then the students asked me about Pinocchio. And they're like, no, so you tell a student you can't read something, they're going to read it. And we're talking about, come on, it's a millennium.
Yeah.
Students can't read Pinocchio. So it's interesting. It's just interesting. And also, it's a female talking about young children in sexually compromising situations. I wonder if it'd be different if it was a male talking about it. There's all these differences, what's allowed in certain.
I mean, they teach Lolita, Nabokov's Lolita in high schools. It's part of the curriculum.
Oh my God, yeah. So so that's interesting. But it ended up that a high school did use it, as a book one year, and I read about it, and some community colleges use it, and when they use it and invite me, I mean, I'll go wherever I'm invited, and it's beautiful. I've been in places where the students have made me a dish of every one of the cultures in the class.
Wow, yeah, that's beautiful.
And it's just exciting. I mean, for me, it's just an honor to do this, and a privilege. So.
Yeah, it's an honor and a privilege to be talking with you here today. Thank you, Alicia. Thanks to everyone. I want to just remind people to get the book. This is on Angie's copy. Don't judge me. And Angie's gonna be mad because I marked up some of it by accident. But
signed copy. I better get my book brand new.
Está nuevecito. No, but Nancy, thank you. It's a hell of a collection, super necessary. If you have adolescents, I think it's powerful to all age groups, but I think it's extra powerful to adolescents just because it really captures what it means to wanting to go to the forest, explore, but having all these adults and all these people wanting to protect you. They want to protect you, but you're still going to go out there in the forest, and you get that time and time again throughout the collection. We have loss, but we also see a lot. We see how beautiful life could be in the midst of all this loss and all this drama.
Yeah, and that's the truth that despite all the loss, there's all this beauty and loss at the same time. It's just an interesting thing to see, to do and experience.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Annecy. Angie, any announcements?
Yes. So JP mentioned about purchasing the book. You could go on wordupbooks.com and purchase the book. And you could also purchase the book via Bookshop, where we have a bookshop, Dominican Writers. You could look up our bookshop and find Annecy's book and other books by Dominican authors on our list. And I want to thank you, Annecy. It's always a pleasure to have these conversations with you. So I really appreciate you. And JP, my dog, parece que están tocando la puerta.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Angie, and thank you, JP, for, again, birthing, this process. And for everybody that is from all over New York City and the United States that are here, I really want to thank you all for coming. It just, warms my heart and inspires me to go and write, and I hope it inspires all of you to go and write your stories,
There was this one person in the chat who says they want to bring you to their high school.
That would be nice. I would not mind. I remember going to actually not a high school, but a junior high school ones. And they're like, the kids were so smart. What are you writing? And I couldn't actually read anything. I wrote maybe a little piece. I read something, but I would come anytime to the high school.
Your book was part of our book club, so people have been reading it. So, and this was part of the discussion that we were meant to have for the book club. So now conversations with JP usually persuades people to go out and buy the book. So our group chat on my WhatsApp is lighting up because everyone is saying that they need to go get this book.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
That's awesome.
That's great.
So every Thursday, guys, as a reminder, we have these conversations with a Dominican author. If you want to know more about our programming, go on our website, dominicanwriters.com. Follow our Instagram account, our Facebook account, and you will see all the information about upcoming programming and author conversations and book club meetups that are all happening virtually. So subscribe to our website and stay informed. And of course, stay safe and continue respecting the social distancing rules. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Awesome.
have a good night, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good
Bye.
night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.